Welcome back. We are now on chapter 5. Just to catch you up a little bit, uh, a little bit of recap from the previous chapters. Victor is now at school. He's been there for a couple of years, and he has discovered the secret of creating life already. He doesn't tell us how, and by us I mean his friend Robert Walton, because this story is being told as if Frankenstein were telling it, his own history, his life, what led him up to the creation of the creature and everything that happened after that, to a friend named Robert Walton. He's telling the story to him and therefore to us, and he doesn't want to share the secret of creating life because, like some mad scientists in fiction, he regrets everything that he's done and he doesn't want anyone to follow in his footsteps. So, that's where we are. Chapter 5. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. I think it's that phrase, spark of being, that makes people think he used lightning to bring him to life. I mean, it's a pretty common thing, especially in movies, to assume that Frankenstein brought him to life with lightning. Especially since he goes on to say it was already 1 in the morning, the rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. It breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe? Or how delineate the wretch whom, with such infinite pains and care, I had endeavored to form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful, great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries beneath. His hair was of lustrous black and flowing, his teeth of a pearly whiteness. But these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, that seemed almost of the same color as the dun-white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion and straight black lips. If you've been watching, you know that I don't intend to read every single word. Just a few passages here and there that I think are more interesting than others, and comment on them. I'm not good at speaking. But he definitely in this sentence, or in this paragraph rather, he's showing his friend Robert Walton how his perspective on the creature has changed over the years. In the beginning, he thought he was beautiful, but now he looks back and he remembers how hideous and how deformed, even for a dead person cobbled together from multiple dead people, how deformed he looked, and he's marveling at how he could have thought such a creature was beautiful. I mean, obviously, when he created the monster, the creature, he was flush with having created life. But now, at the end of his life, he can look back and he can properly appreciate the horror that he created. This was something that we talked about when I reviewed The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I said that Mr. Hyde was an evil man, and that everybody who looked at him could tell that he was evil, and that because they could tell he was evil, they expected him to look deformed in some way. So they keep trying to describe him as deformed, but they couldn't think of any particular deformity. The attitude being that if you look bad, you must be bad. And if you are bad, you must look bad. Tolkien had a few words to say about that when he had Frodo describe Aragorn. He said that if Aragorn were evil, he would probably look fairer and feel fouler. It's that contrast between how something looks and how something is. But often our perceptions are what color that. Mary Shelley still creates an evil-looking creature, but Frankenstein, at this point in the narrative, is showing us how the same creature looks the same way, looks evil, but Frankenstein, looking at him from two different perspectives, is how he decides whether or not the creature is beautiful. It doesn't matter what the creature actually looks like. When Frankenstein sees him as beautiful, he is beautiful. And when he sees him as evil, that's when he sees him as ugly. He goes on to say, I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I had desired it with an ardor that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length lassitude succeeded to the tumult I had before endured, and I threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavoring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought that I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead. My teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed. When by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaw opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand was stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped and rushed downstairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing each sound as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. You might recognize that from the introduction that Mary Shelley wrote that I read in a previous video. She talked about about her original idea and how it came to her. It's interesting to be able to come up with an idea of a contextless sort, and to be able to build an entire story around it. That's where it started, with the creature coming to him in the nighttime. Talks about how he never slept during the night. He just or rather, he did sleep, but very restlessly. And in the morning, he's dismal and wet, and it's still raining, and he's still walking, trying to ease the load that weighed upon his mind. He's going through the streets without any clear conception of where I was or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear, and I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. She quotes the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner here. Like one who on a lonely road doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned around walks on, and turns no more his head, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. Does want to go back to his apartment. He finds an inn, and by a strange coincidence, his friend Henry Clerval happens to be there. Just as they both arrive there at the same time, it seems. They talk about how life is back at home and how Clerval's here to go to school himself. Can't bring himself, Frankenstein can't bring himself to tell his friend what he's done. But he does. He does keep thinking about the creature that he left back at his apartment, wondering if it's even still alive at this point. But as afraid as he is to go check on the monster, he's more afraid of letting his friend see him. Goes up to the apartment. And it's gone. He talks about how his having spent so long with denying himself rest and everything finally catches up with him, and he's confined with a fever for several months, and that Henry's the only person who waits on him. When Henry writes back, he doesn't tell them that Victor is sick, just because his father's also sick, and he doesn't want to worry any of them. Says that in his fever he raves at times about the monster, and that Henry at first believed them to be the wanderings of a disturbed imagination. But eventually he starts to believe that there is something to Victor's ravings. Eventually he recovers. It's springtime now, apparently. He was sick all winter. And apparently the monster has been absent all winter. Clerval convinces him that he needs to write a letter himself to let his family know how he's doing. He says that a letter from Elizabeth has been there for a while now, and reading it starts off chapter 6. My dearest cousin. She calls him cousin, but keep in mind she's actually his adopted sister. Cousin is just what they call each other. You have been ill, very ill, and even the constant letters of dear kind Henry are not sufficient to reassure me on your account. You are forbidden to write, to hold a pen, yet one word from you, dear Victor, is necessary to calm our apprehensions. For a long time, I have thought that each post would bring this line, and my persuasions have restrained my uncle from undertaking a journey to Ingolstadt. I have prevented his encountering the inconveniences and perhaps dangers of so long a journey. Yet how often have I regretted not being able to perform it myself. I figure to myself that the task of attending on your sickbed has devolved on some mercenary old nurse who could never guess your wishes, nor minister to them with the care and affection of your poor cousin. Yet that is over now. Clerval writes that indeed you are getting better. I eagerly hope that you will confirm this intelligence soon in your own handwriting. She goes on to tell him more about how the family's doing, his younger brother, Ernest. She talks about Justine, another person who came to live with them in the same way that Elizabeth did. It's, it's a little weird. It's like, I've mentioned before about how characters are the most important part of any story and how Mary Shelley is great at creating characters. But it's like she just now, at this point in the story, decided to create the character of Justine. The way that Elizabeth talks about her and about her history and about everything. about how much she means to Victor and how much she meant to Victor's mother when she was still alive. It's like she says that she is relaying all this because she thinks Victor may have forgotten about her, but at one point she says that Justine, you may remember, was a great favorite of yours. I mean, he hasn't been gone that long. If she's one of his favorites, it's not like he'd forget her. It's a little like it's like she got to it's like Mary Shelley got to this point in the story and then decided that I'm gonna put a new character in, but I don't want to go back and rewrite everything that I've already written, so I'm just going to have Elizabeth write about her in the letter and let the readers fight about her that way. She says that a few months after Victor left to go to school in Ingolstadt, Justine was called home by her real mother because all her brothers and sisters had died, and the mother had and felt guilty for neglecting her. And with the death of Victor's Victor's own mother, that had Justine had changed because of grief. But going back to her real mother's house didn't help that very much. Mother died, and Justine is back with the Frankensteins. She she also decides to share a bit of local gossip with Frankenstein. I'm not sure if any of these people will become important later in the story. So, I mean, it could just be that Mary felt that Elizabeth was the kind of person who would share gossip, so better put it in there. We'll find out later, I'm sure. The letter was dated March 18th. Hmm. Victor immediately resolves to write them a letter to make sure they're not too anxious about him. A couple of weeks later, he is all better. He introduces his friends to some of the professors. And it seems that he's got a bit of PTSD about the whole thing. He says, ever since the fatal night, the end of my labors, and the beginning of my misfortunes, I had conceived a violent antipathy even to the name of natural philosophy. When I was otherwise quite restored to health, the sight of a chemical instrument would renew all the agony of my nervous symptoms. Mm-hmm. Henry saw this and had removed all my apparatus from my view. He had also changed my apartment, for he perceived that I had acquired a dislike for the room which had previously been my laboratory. But these cares of Clerval were made of no avail when I visited the professors. Walden inflicted torture when he praised, with kindness and warmth, the astonishing progress I had made in the sciences. He soon perceived that I disliked the subject, but not guessing the real cause, he attributed my feelings to modesty, and changed the subject from my improvement to the science itself, with a desire, as I evidently saw, of drawing me out. What could I do? He meant to please, and he tormented me. I felt as if he had placed carefully, one by one, in my view, those instruments which were to be afterwards used in putting me to a slow and cruel death. I writhed under his words, yet dared not exhibit the pain I felt. Clerval, whose eyes and feelings were always quick in discerning the sensations of others, declined the subject, alleging in excuse his total ignorance, and the conversation took a more general turn. I thanked my friend from my heart, but I did not speak. I saw plainly that he was surprised, but he never attempted to draw my secret from me. Krempe was not equally docile, and in my condition at that time of almost insupportable sensitiveness, his harsh, blunt encomiums gave me even more pain than the benevolent approbation of Walden. "Damn the fellow!" cried he. "Why, Clerval, I assure you he has outstripped us all. Ay, stare if you please, but it is nevertheless true. The youngster who but a few years ago believed in Cornelius Agrippa as firmly as in the gospel has now set himself at the head of the university, and if he is not soon pulled down, we shall all be out of countenance. Ay, Frankenstein is modest, an excellent quality in a young man. Young men should be diffident of themselves, you know, Clerval. I was myself when young, but that wears out in a very short time." Krempe had now commenced an eulogy on himself, which happily turned the conversation from a subject that was so annoying to me. Talks about how Clerval's planned academic studies include learning the languages of the East so that he can turn his eyes towards that region of the world. Victor joins him in learning the other languages, but says, unlike him, I did not attempt a critical knowledge of their dialects, for I did not contemplate making any other use of them than temporary amusement. I read merely to understand their meaning, and they well repaid me my labors. Their melancholy is soothing, and their joy is elevating, to a degree I never experienced in studying the authors of any other country. When you read their writings, life appears to consist in a warm sun and a garden of roses, in the smiles and frowns of a fair enemy, in the fire that consumes your own heart. How different from the manly and heroic poetry of Greece and Rome. Can't help thinking that Mary is taking advantage of this little paragraph here to put in her own feelings about these things, which nothing wrong with that, of course. And it is a reminder, I think I mentioned this in an earlier video, it's a reminder that different cultures can teach us different things, and that reading the books that are written by the peoples of those cultures can help us to expand our own minds and learn more. Excuse me. My voice is really getting scratchy now. Thankfully, Chapter 6 is going to close up soon. Talks about how they kept studying throughout the summer. They were planning to go back to Geneva at the end of fall, but winter and snow kept the roads impassable, and they wouldn't be able to make it until the next spring. So it's been at least a year now since he created the monster, the creature. No sight of it. He says he would have gone home earlier, but he didn't want to leave Clerval behind before he had a chance to get used to it. The month of May had already commenced when Henry proposed a pedestrian tour in the environs of Ingolstadt, that I might bid a personal farewell to the country I had so long inhabited. I acceded with pleasure to this proposition. I was fond of exercise, and Clerval had always been my favorite companion in the rambles of this nature that I had taken among the scenes of my native country. And I spent a couple of weeks doing that, Again, he's not sociable with anybody but Clerval. Clerval's able to help him learn to love nature again. Help him to become more the person he was before he went off to school, before he was isolated from all his true friends, before he was so caught up in his endeavor to create life. We returned to our college on a Sunday afternoon. The peasants were dancing, and everyone we met appeared gay and happy. My own spirits were high, and I bounded along with the feelings of unbridled joy and hilarity. And that's how Chapter 6 ends. Can't wait to see how Chapter 7 goes. That's all for now. Thank you for watching. I'll see you again next week.